Okay guys, now we're going to talk about training and conditioning for the backcountry hunter. And I used a bit more of my allotted time on the previous module, so I'm going to try to be very succinct with this presentation, and I think the material will lend itself to that. When we want to begin thinking about how to condition for hunting, I like to talk about the 5 components of athleticism. And those are strength, speed, power, agility, and endurance. And you can typically put those in any order because they're all important. However, I'll try to stay with that same order as we go through the presentation. So strength is your force production capacity. You can think of like a 1 rep max test and other ways of measuring that. Speed is maximum velocity, and primarily that's going to be sprinting, but there are also rapid movements that we can consider for athletes in many sports. Power has both an aerobic and anaerobic capacity or category, and it's simply the expression of force times distance divided by time. So we have anaerobic power if you think about explosive lifts or pushing a sled or things like that, and then we have aerobic power, which is essentially a 5 to 10 minute sustained effort or output. Agility is the unique combination of mobility, stability, fluidity, and reactivity, and those things make a very athletic presentation in the athletic individual. And then we have endurance, which is cardiorespiratory endurance and muscular fatigue resistance. So those categories we use all the time at TLA in program design, and they're well recognized, and we can take those 5 items and put them into what we call the ACRS, or the Athletic Capacity Rating System. Essentially, it is a 1, 2, 3 rating, but if we look at a 0 rating in any of those 5 capacities or categories, again, like strength or speed or endurance, a 0 would mean that we have a suboptimal situation or that the capacity is practically absent, so we don't want that. But if we have a 1, 2, or 3 score, 1 is low, but not low in a negative sense, just low as in, hey, that's an adequate baseline. We have a 2, which is moderate or a medium level, and then 3 is a maximum level in the individual. And so what I'll typically do using the ACRS is I will work with clients all the time, and we'll use a variety of tests and measures, not necessarily standardized across the population, because age, gender, abilities, etc. Will require us often to select different tests, but we can actually assess and rank or rate a person's abilities in those 5 capacities, and thus they get a score in the ACRS. And by the same token, we can analyze a sport and figure out what the demands might be. So the score, or the ACRS rating for a backcountry athlete, is 21213. And that's, again, if we have things placed in the order of strength, speed, power, agility, and endurance. So that's a 2 for strength, and you can think about that with load carrying capacity, which is probably the big one for hunting. In speed, we really only need a 1 or a baseline level. Closing the distance in certain situations, in other words, trying to get close to game or hurrying to get to a certain point prior to the end of legal light, things like that. For power, we have a 2 rating or a moderate rating because there are episodic tasks that we encounter, particularly climbing steep hills or packing out meat. And then agility, we need a 1. We need a baseline for that. Obstacle negotiation like deadfall, stream crossings, etc., and all the positions we use in not just hunting, but hiking in the backcountry and camping as well. And finally, we have endurance. And the type of endurance I like to speak about for the backcountry hunter is unique. It's repeatability. It's not just your basic cardio, aerobic fitness, marathon runner type of conditioning. Nothing wrong with that, and we need some of it, but it's really an all-day durability that we want to create in the beast, the human, the athlete in the backcountry. So training the backcountry hunter, I have several considerations. First of all, pack weights are generally going to be higher, first of all, due to the type of backpack that we need to use, and then also when we are successful, we've got the whole meat issue, plus all the additional gear that we need to carry and that we talked about in one of the previous modules. The majority of the terrain that we negotiate is off-trail. we need to prepare for success. In other words, meat is dead weight, and we just need to be conditioned and prepared to accept that load, and it is significant, or can be in most cases. Excess fatigue will adversely affect our motivation and our concentration ability, and we don't want that. So we want to be, again, durable and conditioned enough that we can be at our best day after day if we need to. We want to have programming that makes our exercise purpose-driven and results-oriented. So I always recommend, when you're training for a specific type of event or a status that you're looking for, that we train for 12 to 16 weeks. That's a sweet spot because it's long enough to get many physiologic adaptations, but it's also brief enough, or relatively brief enough, that we can focus and stay consistent and stay in the program without dropping out, falling off. And that does happen if people try to design a program that's excessively long. We need to place an emphasis on load carrying and full body endurance. And so those are the big things that we want to work on in our training programs. We also want to establish some key performance indicators, or KPIs. And the way I like to look at that is, if we're thinking about load carrying and also terrain negotiation, we want to look at distance, duration, and weight carried versus our outcomes. In other words, our time, our perceived effort, or fatigue and recovery needs. And if we can see over time our ability to go further and potentially heavier, and also to do that more rapidly and also with less physiologic expense, well, then that's all the better. If you're looking for a comprehensive approach, there's certainly one that exists, and that's my program. It's called Fit for the Field, and it's a course designed specifically for the backcountry hunter. It's a step-by-step 16-week program. It uses outdoor workouts. So it uses outdoor functional training with simple equipment, using workouts that are done at fields, parks, playgrounds, athletic facilities like that. And there's really unique benefits to doing that. And then also a very specific hiking progression, which includes longer hikes and shorter hikes, and the use of interval training and some of the appropriate methodologies to bring out these traits that we're looking for. And so this program, Fit for the Field, it's exclusively available to members in the Lifetime Athlete app, and I'm not trying to pitch that here, but just letting you know that it addresses all of the capacities that the backcountry hunter requires via that RC, or per that ACRS, excuse me, and it does so in a very organized fashion. But let's say, okay, I want something more basic, I want to do it myself. You want the simple method. Well, I've got it here, and it's extremely effective, and it's just pure gold. It's the ruck and carry. And so by that I mean rucking, or hiking with a loaded pack over mixed terrain. The weight can vary in the pack, the terrain can vary, distance can vary, 2 to 3 times per week, with gradually increasing volume. If you do that for 12 to 16 weeks, you're going to be prepared adequately to hunt in the backcountry. And then we have a heavy kettlebell carry session. So that only needs to last 10 to 20 minutes and be done 2 to 3 times per week with a mix of a variety of carries. So there might be a bilateral dumbbell or kettlebell carry, the farmer walk. You might do that unilaterally, which is a suitcase carry. Have a various rack position, front carry. These are some of the things I would recommend. And I'd also say, as you're out there spending 10 or 20 minutes walking around a field or a park or a playground or your backyard, you take some breaks, and the breaks are actually not breaks. There are times when you do a few squats or lunges or presses or swings or cleans, and mix those in. And you can be very specific or not, but as long as you're getting that type of workload in over again, 3 to 4 month period, you're going to be really accomplishing the type of conditioning that's going to be exceedingly valuable. Now, nutrition for the backcountry hunter, we want to divide that up into 2 things. First of all, we have the daily diet. And the daily diet is just what you do at home every day on a regular basis. It needs to support health, It needs to support our training and recovery needs and our body composition goals. And so there's so many ways to do that. I'm only going to give a few key suggestions because I think these are ones that really matter. One of which is getting approximately 1 gram of protein per pound of lean body mass per day. So if I explain that, I like to use lean body mass in that calculation. It makes things a bit more accurate. So if we have a 200-pound individual who's 20% body fat, and there are ways to test this, of course, that means that this person has 160 pounds of lean mass and therefore should shoot for or try to get close to consuming 1 gram of protein per each of those pounds, or 160 grams of protein per day. That might be 4 by 40, in other words, 4 meals or serves of 40 grams of protein per day. And as long as you get close, there is no perfect. That will be quite beneficial in supporting, conditioning and recovery and muscle protein synthesis and all the things we're looking for. And I would certainly say, since this is related to hunting, that the animal protein sources have some advantages over the plant-based. You make your own decisions there, of course, but the bioavailability and assimilation of the animal proteins is slightly better. I like to suggest that you select the macronutrient distribution that works for you, and what I mean by this is looking at low versus high carb and consequently low versus high fat. So if we've got protein as a constant, some people will just do better on higher carb diets, and some will prefer to have a lower carb diet, and that's fine. There are ways to do this, especially in your daily diet. So whatever seems to make your health and your body composition and the blood work and what you talk about with your healthcare provider, whatever makes that best, that's what you should choose. And as long as you're within reasonable caloric levels, I think you're going to be successful, or I know you will be. Also, I have a program that I use. Again, I've used it for years with all my clients. It's the EBD. That's the Earth-Based Diet. In fact, we have a course in our app, which is the Lean for Life course, which emphasizes the Earth-Based Diet. So in simple terms, it's basically eating what you think it is. Things that are not from outer space and look like they came from planet Earth. Whole, natural, seasonal, local, fresh, single ingredient, minimally processed, not excessively packaged foods. And you can take that as far as you want, but if most of your meals are made up primarily of that, you're a lot of the way there, or where you need to be. And I definitely like to recommend with all of my clients 2 to 4 meals per day when the sky is light. And that's really one of the big drivers we have now in nutrition research and education is circadian biology, circadian clocks, digestive clocks, and there's a real strong case to be made for eating or consuming your foods when the sky is light as opposed to darkness, of course. And this is dynamic because depending on where you're living in the summer or winter, your eating window may need to fluctuate a little bit, and that's a great way to make adjustments. Sometimes in this modern world we get too consistent and doing things maybe for no evolutionarily consistent reason. Just food for thought there, and I guess that's a pun. Then when we're in the field, so we call this the in-field diet, things change a little bit. We really need to be cognizant of meeting or slightly exceeding our caloric demands, secondary to these energetic requirements of what we're doing out there. And I know Ryan has a process that, a model that he's been working with, Backpacking Light, that helps you to really be more accurate in calculating what your energetic and caloric needs might be. So that's certainly something that I would recommend. And in the field, we really want to put a lot of planning into what are our meals, what are our snacks, what are our daily caloric requirements, how are we organizing it. A lot of people like to use like one large gallon-sized Ziploc bag for the day and have food per day set up like that. It's not a bad idea. I think it's always a great idea also to make sure you're familiar with the food and test it so your GI tract agrees and you don't get surprised out there in the field and have disaster pants or worse. We want to look at caloric density versus weight. So here is where processed food might be acceptable or actually preferred when we're in the field and we're out there, and every ounce matters. I mean, literally it does. And so if we can try to find a way to pack calories and hopefully nutrition into lightweight. That's really what we want to do in the field. I like to recommend strategic fueling. So what I mean by that is we want to have a plan for our eating so that we, again, are accomplishing these goals. Carb trickling or carbohydrate trickling is one thing I think that's really recognized now in the endurance sports arena. You think about the Tour de France or Ironman triathlon, other things, and we're looking at the amount of carbohydrate in grams per hour that elite athletes are taking in. They're even training their guts to be able to do that more, and doing this will spare or preserve muscle glycogen because we're, again, keeping the blood glucose levels, supplying the working muscles via that. And this, you have to experiment because everyone's a little bit different with how much you want or need to do and what foods that you like. I mean, again, this really looks like the gummy bear or the Swedish fish occasionally, or it could be liquids. There are other sources, of course. And there's also a little bit of a reality check here. We have to ask ourselves, if you're working steadily hour after hour, zone 2 and up, you really have to be conscious of this. But you know what? If it's stop and go and it's mostly zone 1 stuff, then you do need to consume some food throughout the day, but perhaps not to the level that the Tour de France riders are doing. I want to think about that. I like to also suggest front loading. So front loading means putting in some calories prior to a large demand. So that could be before, if you've got a mountain climb. A long hill climb. You're going to pack out meat. Fuel up before so you get some fuel in the furnace and in the tank, and that way you're just going to do better. And I think everyone knows what that's all about. We have to have discipline with this consumption when we're in the field, because if you get to the end of the day and your food bag is still relatively full, yeah, you can have a giant dinner and you can partially make things up, but actually you won't do as well where you're managing glycogen depletion and replenishment ratios as if you were consuming your food more regularly throughout the day. So try to avoid long fasts. There might be a place for those elsewhere, but not necessarily in the field. Going right along with nutrition, of course, we have to mention hydration, and it's super important, and we all know this, but I like to also emphasize sipping versus chugging. And there's some data to support this, where if you're consuming water, again, it depends on how much you're exercising, how warm the temperature is, what your own tolerances are, but let's say that it's 8 ounces every 15 to 30 minutes, your body is going to be able to absorb that better than if you chug a liter at larger intervals, because not all of that will be absorbed. Some of it will be excreted just because of the load that's placed upon the kidneys. So try to get into that habit of being regular and not getting behind with your hydration. Electrolytes are also valuable, especially for the hard training or hard working hunter in the field, day after day, long days. Sodium, potassium, calcium, magnesium, all of those things can be of value, and there's different ratios and mixes. You probably have some that you prefer, and certainly you should test those, but I would recommend using them. Sometimes it just makes your water taste better, so you tend to drink more, which is a plus, but again, there's some necessary nutrition there. The final thing I want to say about this is we want to support nutrition with sleep. And 2 areas. Splurge on your sleep system. And I've noticed this, especially as I've gotten older. 30 years ago, or 40 years ago, I almost could sleep on the bare ground and get a good night's rest, and I'd wake up fresh. And that's no longer the case whatsoever. And so whatever you need in terms of sleeping pad, your sleeping bag, your quilt, your system, make sure that it is comfortable and more than adequate, and maybe overcommit there and carry a few extra ounces there, because you've got all this conditioning to do it anyway, and it's going to help you immensely. The idea here is that we're going to maximize our recovery so that this nutrition and hydration works in conjunction with our sleep, so we have that multi-day freshness, and we can do that over and over. So no matter how well conditioned you might be, these things help immensely. So that's a few thoughts on conditioning and training for backcountry hunters, and certainly how to use nutrition as well. And I know if you employ these things, you're going to do just fine. Thanks.